gasoline. I keep trying to visualize, capitalize on my ambitions, but my fire just burns out. But since day one, I know what took the beating, and every day now, I know I'm just repeating the struggle to reach out. As I pour my own heart out, rejuvenate my soul as my energy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Natalia, and I am a host of a podcast called More Than a Pretty Face. But today I am taking a little bit of a different turn and having a conversation with Joe Green. Joe is running for representative of Ward 5A08,
That's correct.
ANC in DC. And Joe, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Good evening, Natalia. My name is Joseph Green III, or commonly known as Joe Green, and I am running as the ANC candidate for Ward 5, Single Member District 08.
And he is a write-in candidate, so I think that's a lot of passion and a lot of drive. Is that something that's typical that happens here, that there's a lot of write-in candidates, or are you kind of an anomaly for the situation?
For this voting year, I am an anomaly, and I do have the incumbent is the only person I'm running against, and so yes, but there is a procedure to cast oneself as a write-in candidate. So that's handled through the Board of Elections. I had to verify my address, and I had to swear in through the election officials that I am who I was, and I lived where I live, and I am intending to be an ANC candidate as a write-in person.
So why do you want to run for ANC in Ward 5?
First, I think that the position itself is ideal for somebody like me who really has an interest in engaging and organizing my local community to rally around certain issues that are of interest to them. The position is very, very unique. I'm originally from Chicago, and we do have precinct captains and precinct coordinators, but not in the function as I've seen as an ANC. And so based upon my passion and the level of interest that I have in an array of different areas, everything from health to education to workforce development training, I thought that this would be a perfect opportunity for me to articulate the views of people who live in this particular district.
So, but what is your deeper why? What did you see happening, and why were you like, I have to be, why not somebody else? Why can't you just support another candidate? Why is it you? You know, like, what's your, in your spirit, what is like, I have to do this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the reason why is because in my travels over the last 5 years, especially going to cities such as Nashville, Wilmington, Delaware, Chicago, Cleveland, New York City, Philadelphia, Memphis, Little Rock, and Washington, D.C., I've noticed that the urbanization or the gentrification, however you want to coin the phrase, and the displacement of people who have lived in their communities for so many years is endemic, to the degree that even in where I live, the fact that there are so many folks who are on fixed income who are being forced to move out because increase in taxes, the fact that, which I think is endemic to Washington, D.C., that our civil services and job opportunities and the culture of siloism, as I call it, is rampant, in that we don't have a lot of connection between jobs that are available and people who are preparing for those jobs who live in D.C. And unless we can figure out a way to connect the dots, so to speak, and to get our kids or young people and underemployed and undereducated adults into job training programs that are going to be absorbed into this economy, then they are going to be lost. And those who have the means to build mixed-use housing and construction projects and other infrastructure projects will look outside of D.C. for people who to take over these jobs, which will only accelerate and aggravate the gentrification process. And there's nothing wrong with gentrification, but at the same time, I don't like gentrification if it's at the expense of people who don't have the opportunities and don't have the access to sustain good wages and to stay in their communities.
And what population do you think? Because I know we talked a little bit about it. Like you feel like it mostly affects people of color, specifically Black
Absolutely, of
people.
course, yes, it does, and it's not hard. It's not hard to see if you are walking down any street that has a construction site, and you can just look at the number of people of color versus people who are not of color. But I'm speaking in this particular instance of Black people, and as I was telling you earlier, in the new development just down the street from Aventine Fort Totten, for about 2.5, 3 years, they're building that building, and every day when I walked to the metro and saw the construction workers, not one of them was Black. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't people of color, but I saw two Blacks over a 2.5, 3 year period. And perhaps there are more, but there's a disproportionate representation of people who live in this area. So that is of concern to me.
I have, like, I love your story because I have this vision of like creating a network and a program and an institution where we can really bring marginalized groups of women and elevate them. So what
Yes.
you're saying to me is so dear to my heart because I feel like it's so much of what I want to do as a Black woman. And when I first moved to this city, even though I came here and I was like, I'm gonna go get my graduate degree at this fancy college, it was still like I don't have access to a lot of the places and things that I see so many of my peers have access to simply because I wasn't brought up in a way where I was able to get those type of connections. And I feel like in these wards that are very silo, you see a lot of that.
Yes, that's right. And I think that I know that with making it a priority to connect the dots, so to speak, of opportunities that exist for people who live in Washington, I think that you can see some definite changes in terms of our culture, the way that we approach people, the way that we look at workforce development training, and we're not talking about it and just making a cocktail discussion about it, but we are really, just as in other countries, are relying upon our DC high school youth to go into jobs that are in high demand. And specifically what I've been thinking about is in the public infrastructure. PEPCO, Washington Water, Washington Gas, the Metro, they're all going to be looking for people who specialize in the trades. Everything from bus maintenance, train maintenance, pipe fitting, welding. It's been expressed to me into a larger community that these 4 or 5 major public utility companies in areas are really seeking people to fill the jobs of those who are either retiring or else newly created positions that are going to require specific skills training. And Washington, D.C. is doing things. I mean, I was just at the CBC conference and listening to Dr. Tony Summers, the head of UDC Community College, and he was saying that they're already engaged in a partnership with PEPCO. And they have had, over the past year, about 150 applicants and hired about 75 people to start an apprenticeship program through PEPCO. And so, things are working, but the average person doesn't know about that. And so we have to, number one, communicate that. We have to advocate and create a priority to say, we need young people to get into these jobs. Then number two, we need to prepare them and train them and start not at high school at 9th grade, but we have to start them at 6th and 7th grade and let them know that these particular jobs or potential career fields that they can go into are well paying. They'll keep them in the city, and they'll be providing a needy service for the city's expansion and growth.
I think the point you brought up. Well, I was also had the pleasure of being at the Congressional Black Caucus Annual Conference, CBC, this past week as well, and I think you brought up a very interesting point that things are happening, but we just don't know about it, and I feel sometimes, systematically they're being kept from us.
Yes, I have a feeling that they're systematically kept from us. And so, I go back to your original question, why do you want to run for ANC? Because these folks are kind of like the conduit between the private sector, the developers, and the public sector, the agencies that are making proposals, and those elected officials who make decisions that affect their constituency base. And so I think that, using this position and optimizing it to its best potential in terms of communicating with the constituency, making sure that proposals that are run through your district are sound and that they are inclusive and that they have our interests at heart. I believe that it's critical. We have, and I've said this at meetings before, it's like DC has the ingredients, but we don't have the recipe.
I think also they just don't want to create the cake at times, because well, that's just my opinion. Even in the short amount of time that I've lived in this area, I just feel like we have the ingredients, we have a recipe, we just keep pushing it to the back because
it's not a priority.
It's not a priority because I feel like people of color are often not a priority. And from what you were telling me earlier, it's like you want to change that.
I want to change that. And the thing is that, we cannot all the time rely upon people outside our community. We have to rely upon ourselves as people of color to create and set our own agenda and push it through, and also understand the resources that we have at hand to make these things happen, so that these projects, whether it's work-based learning, work-based training, job force development, what have you, these things come to fruition. And so, I am just getting into the political arena, and so I'm not going to pass judgment on the incumbent or any of his counterparts who serve in other some single member districts. But I do believe that with my work at the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, me understanding how we are pushing and making apprenticeships and work-based learning a priority at our agency. I want to make sure that that priority is addressed at the ground level, at the grassroots level. And so I'd like to push that here in my constituency.
I think that's really lovely because so often I think we get bogged down with like the system just doesn't work for us, or like we're too tired, because you also have like a very important job, and you do work a lot on your own time. So then to put yourself another step into your community and kind of give back, because you haven't lived here for that long, right?
I've lived in this particular community for 4 years. In February it'll be 5 years. So, compared to some of our elected officials and those who are running for office, there's some who lived in this area, in this ward, all their lives. But I have made Fort Totten my home. I love living here. I jog outside every other day, and I know people by face, some I know by name. And I love what's happening to this community in terms of its growth and its plans for growth. And it's residential enough so that people can learn to know each other and to stewardship together and have fellowship. So I don't want to move from Fort Totten, but I also, at the same time, I want to make sure that there's opportunities that it's affordable and that people can be absorbed into the workforce here, and that it's going to grow without not at the expense of people of color.
I think that's important, and to develop, like, push yourself into, not push yourself because it sounds like they didn't want you. You're like, I'm forcing my way in. But just really like immerse yourself in a community and make that commitment also to people of color, because like as a greater community. And I think so often we get bogged down in things not happening immediately, and that's where like the passion comes in, and you willing to stick it out is truly, I think, what's inspiring. Because when I think about programs that I want to be a part of, or that I want to create one day. I want them to be sustainable, and I really want them to be community led. So even if I leave, because I move on somewhere else to help us start another community, or I do something else, like I want to know that the infrastructure is sound enough to where it doesn't necessarily need me. I want to work to a place where something doesn't need me anymore, and I can start
work
something
your way
new.
out of a job.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's kind of been my mantra with some jobs I've had in the past, is to work myself out of it so that, I have a skill, I have some information, I impart it to somebody who lives in the community, they learn it, they leverage it, and they use it for their folks, and then I move on.
Mm-hmm.
And that isn't necessarily the model I have for myself here, but I do think that it is a scalable model. So, if we can learn how to communicate and how to connect the dots and how we can better, not to, but to better augment our resources and service and knowledge capital and opportunities, then we can be, a better us, and we can live in a better community, and then we can live in one that also supports one another, and this is something that we must do, because, like I said before, in all of these communities, these urban communities that I visited all around the country, I must have gone to about 25 cities in the last 5 years on work-related travel. And every single one is facing the problem of gentrification and or else the displacement of people of color in the name of modernization and development. And so this is of concern to me. Mm-hmm. And with me being 54 years old, I've seen the cycle happen where in the 60s and the early 70s there was a white flight where whites were moving out of the cities and moving into the suburbs. Now it's just the opposite over the last 15 years. And so, these are not coincidental, and it's not arbitrary. It's all done methodically, and it's done, through very detailed planning on part of, the demographics of folks, if people who are retired and they're living an empty nest, they don't want to travel 20 or 30 miles to go to a concert or to a play downtown. They want to live downtown. And so therefore, those who have the money and the means will make sure that, they'll build for those folks. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, without giving the folks who live here an opportunity to move up to better jobs or move into full employment, then we don't have a chance.
That's true, because I think about, I know I'm not scared of, progress. I think technology and our advancements, it's great that I live a 15-minute walk from a Target and a 15-minute walk from a movie theater.
Yeah.
But I also know that I'm at an advantage, even though I don't make any type of money as a grad student, but, I'm still at a place where, I can afford, just because of where I have come from in life, where I started off versus my brothers and sisters who don't have those same type of economic opportunities or just entryways into those spaces to get those economic opportunities. And it's sad because you see how much we helped build these certain areas where you want to put these things, and but we don't get to share in the fortune of it because we've been so pushed out and we've been priced out because we've had to go farther out from our communities anyway to get jobs that don't pay us enough to live in the communities in which we live now.
That's right.
Because so often I feel like the few since I've moved here, I've found very few people that are Washingtonians, have born here, lived here, grew up here.
They live in Maryland mostly.
Yeah, no, literally, most of them just live in Maryland, and there's been very few that have been born and bred in this area. And the ones that have, they all are kind of siloed to different sections, and they don't know any better. And what you had talked about, being siloed within your ward and not kind of banding together, because if you live in Ward 5, you should have a partnership with Ward 8. and how
Yes.
we can build
How we can
together.
scale, yes.
Because I know your focus, even though you're running for Ward 5, like, you still want to be a community leader, and that just doesn't end at Ward 5.
No, it doesn't. And there's some great organizations that work district wide that, I've had some affiliation with. One DC is an organization that's based out of Shaw, and they provide housing advocacy for folks who are living on the berry farms and public housing. And they have demanded, with good reason, that these folks should not be displaced, or at least if they are, that that there is some reasonable housing for them, and to also provide jobs for folks who are underemployed and unemployed, notably in Ward 7 and Ward 8. And so my experience, what they've done, knowing what they've done, and reading their newsletters and everything, it's really honorable. What I see here in D.C., and I lived here for about a year back in 1990 when I was like 25 or 26, and it was a much different D.C. than what we have now. But
It used to be Chocolate City.
yes, it used to be Chocolate City. That's right. It was about 75, 80% black. And I lived actually right up the street on the Washington, D.C. side of Tacoma Park. And, it was something else. It was dangerous. And in many ways reflected, the urban America of that time. And so now, of course, it's still the same theme. It still reflects, the urban America of our time, early 21st century. There's a lot of discrimination, and there's a lot of nuance in the type of discrimination that is practiced in such a way that people cannot quite pinpoint the source of barriers to attain, better housing, or that first mortgage, or that first good job, or that lead, or what have you. These provisions that are made or not made for people of color, for the most part, just like for yourself, you're a graduate student at George Washington University, and I'm not going to make any assumptions, but the rhetorical question I ask, for the person who's sitting right next to you, who's a white woman who may have graduated from the same undergrad, same grad school, do you think that she has the same opportunities as you, or do you think you have the same opportunities as her, in terms of, assuming that you want to go into the same career field? I am going to go off to a side story, but it relates to folks who are at GW. So about 2 years ago, I was giving blood down at the Drew Center. And so, you have 10 or 15 minutes and you're standing or sitting next to folks. So there's a young lady, and I introduced myself, and she said she was from GW. And I was just making conversation. I said, so what are you going to do over the summer? She says, oh, I'm going to get a job on the Hill as an intern. I said, oh, well, have you applied? She says, oh, no, GW sets aside about 200 positions every year. I'm thinking to myself, wait. I'm thinking to myself, I didn't say it to her, but Capitol Hill and GW have this tacit agreement or understanding that sets aside so many hundred positions for interns from GW, probably, young, white, and female. It's like, I never heard of that before, And so, that in itself gives a certain level of privilege to people who go to GW, versus Howard University. I wonder how many positions on the Hill they have set aside for Howard University graduates or undergrads, what have you. Again, it's a rhetorical question.
No, but I think it's still very true. Like, I know that I am very lucky to be going, number one, but I'm at the same time paying for education mostly out of pocket. Whereas, like, I don't feel super comfortable about it. Let's be quite clear, because it's a very expensive school. But at the same time, I have not been set up in a way, because it wasn't like I came from a wealthy household. But I think because of other opportunities I saw, and I think where I went to undergrad, and I grew up in a very small white town. And just from what I was surrounded by, I think, because it wasn't like I grew up very wealthy. Like, my mom's a teacher, my dad's a truck driver, like, very basic, like, immigrant family. I think what I saw around me, I was like, oh, I can kind of do this versus other people of color who maybe haven't been surrounded by what I was surrounded by and didn't think it was possible for more than what they knew. And even so, going to GW, like, I remember getting there and thinking, like, I don't have any connections. Like, I don't know how to put myself in front of these people because I don't look like these people that are in these positions or in these places that I want to work.
Yes.
And so it is my dream to train other women basically to not have to have the experience I had. And even though, like,
How would you characterize your experience in one or two words?
Only one or two words?
Well, you can use more than one or two words. Was it distant, or do you think that it was?
It's difficult because I think it was. I mean, it still is difficult because I didn't have anyone supporting me here. Like, I didn't have parents who could afford to help me pay for rent, and money has always been a thing. So it's like, I was terrified of taking out more loans to pay for my rent. And,
oh my goodness.
You know, like, and not just paying for my education, but I met other people who weren't of color who had parents who could help support them for their rent, who could help support them in a way that they could live in the city versus me who lives outside of the city, and I love where I live, but it's significantly cheaper than trying to live in the city and live with the kind of comfortability and not have to live with like 7 other people or something. And just having, or like they knew somebody down here so they could come down here with an internship, or they start off at a higher status. Just having, especially like the economic kind of opportunity or like assistance versus what I came here with was a huge drawback because I was working. Like I was working sometimes like 50 hours a week, especially during the summer, like so I could pay bills and just pay simple transportation costs. And I didn't really have time, and I was exhausted, and I was like depressed, and to like apply for jobs or apply for internships in my field so I could have that step up and get experience and more
have
so
the
what
experience. It give you a competitive advantage
versus other people that I met who had the time because they didn't have that economic issue or was like in a place where they felt more comfortable to have time to apply for internships and wasn't bogged down by constantly working, and then also having this pressure like from my parents to get my job done, get my degree done in 2 years, because there was just like I gotta work full time because I have to pay my bills, but like I also need to get my degree done, and there's this push to have me have a full-time job. Like that's my parents' goal for me because they want me to be financially stable. Like that's their end goal. And I think if you come from a house of color or an immigrant household, which I am from.
Where were your parents from in Jamaica? Which parish?
So my mom grew up in Kingston and my dad grew up in Spanish Town.
Okay. I lived in Jamaica for 3 years.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, it's lovely. Yeah, my dad came here when he was 22 and my mom came here when she was 6.
Okay.
So there's just like this huge push to be financially stable. Like that's what they want.
Yeah.
Like it's like it doesn't matter kind of what your job is as long as you can do it well and like pay your bills and put money in the bank account. None of this like this is my passion nonsense or like I want it. Like my dad's always says to me like I know you want to help people, but like you also need to pay your bills. Like don't forget about that. And so to have that kind of pressure, which I think a lot of my friends of color have grown up having, and I know I have, to kind of just take time to not have an income for a period of time so you can apply for an internship that probably won't pay you that well. And also to be in a place where, especially if you work in the nonprofit world or some type of public service, you do unpaid internships. And so you're not at an economic level where you can take on unpaid internships, even if they're really amazing. You just can't financially afford that because they require so much of you that you can't also have a job.
You don't have any time to work for money.
Yeah.
And actually, you do raise a very good point because, we in our office, we promote career technical education programs at the high school level. Even though it isn't a requirement, we strongly encourage these high schools that offer these CT programs to find work-based learning opportunities. And so what I found was that, there are lots of great internships that will provide great training and exposure for students, especially in the hard sciences, but they don't pay. And so consequently, the students who are of color, they have to make a choice of, 10 hours a week, great job, no pay, but the family needs money, or else they need money to put clothes in their own bag, or else doing something at in hospitality, working at Marriott that pays $10 or $12 an hour where they're getting something. So they're in the short run, they're being compensated that fulfills their short-term needs, but at the expense of doing something that they really want to do that it's not paying them anything. And so yes, you're right. It's a very, very tough decision to make, especially not necessarily in your case, but if you're living in a household where you're solely responsible for all disposable income that is going to help supplement your lifestyle while you're in high school or later in college or college age.
I think, yeah, because it's especially, I think that especially affects people of color, Black households, Hispanic households, you have to put yourself through everything, and then it comes to, oh, well, you have the education, but you don't have any job experience in that.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden it's like, well, if you were working at the Marriott all throughout college because you had to pay your way or you needed extra money or something, all you looks like you have is hospitality, but you got your degree in biomedical science.
Yeah.
But it's like you can't get a job in biomedical science, so you end up going back to the Marriott in a job that you don't love, not using your degree. And I feel like that happens for a lot of us because we're like, we keep getting promoted because we've been there so long and we don't have time to pursue our other passions because we're not able to be paid for our passion. Even if it's like a hard science where you would think you could get the opportunities to get paid. Like STEM is something that can be in very high demand, but it's like those internships are unpaid or they're not paid to the extent to which you need them. And I think it creates this endless cycle of not poverty, but of people of color not having a voice in certain areas. That's a passion to me, is I wanna break that cycle, and I want people to stand up for what they're worth, because that took me a long time, and I'm still going through that, even to be I refuse to take internships if they're unpaid.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, I absolutely, and even if they say oh, we give college credit, I was like, no, you maybe give me college credit, but that time I'm spending at your place that you're not paying me to do full work. And what I've noticed at nonprofits is you do very real work. It's not just filing.
Oh, yeah.
You're basically another employee that they don't have to pay.
Right. That's
and
right.
So that time, that 20 hours I could be spending, that's time I could be making actual money. And this is why you see that disconnect, or even say people of color in the nonprofit space versus working more so on a business side, because a lot of those internships or anything pay.
Yeah.
And I want to break that cycle. I want kids to know that there are internships out there, say in the nonprofit space or public sector, that will pay you. And here's also how we prepare you to do that. I didn't know how to make a federal resume when I first moved here. And it's a whole different ballgame than making your normal resume. But I didn't grow up in a space that showed that to me,
That's right. That's a very good point. And, that actually you point to another potential barrier. We have probably one of the best summer internship programs, paid internship programs for our high school youth. But doing some of the work that they do, an added benefit, some schools are doing it, but it'd be great to have all students required to learn how to fill out a federal application. It's an exercise. It is a real exercise, and it takes a lot of thought, and you have to pay attention to punctuation and syntax and grammar, and understanding who your reader is. But it's a great exercise. As a matter of fact, that's a great exercise. Maybe I should have maybe a night, to just work with high school kids, just to be working on their SF-171. Is that what they call it still?
I don't know. I've always learned as a federal, because it's really hard, because if you're applying for a job versus an internship there, there's people who have veteran status, have top priority. Then it's there's all these tiers, and you have to make it through the computer system, and it's all these crazy things. And then it's, if you apply for an internship through the Pathways programs, other programs they have, that can get you into the government, and without having to do all the nonsense of just applying, it allows you to kind of sneak in a way, and so you get that experience. You're not a full-time employee, and I think a lot of people can benefit from that, but they don't know how to formulate the right type of resume to get seen because they live in a Ward 5 You know, they're not exposed to the people that can help them.
And,
like
and
that.
actually, yeah, and you actually are talking about another barrier, and that relates to what I was talking about in terms of lack of communication, lack of information. And one thing I've learned in my job is that every year, sometime after September, October, you'll have NASA and these other federal agencies, Smithsonian, will be starting the process to identify and recruit summer interns in underpaid situation, for summer jobs for high school students, undergrad, and graduates. And 9 times out of 10, average high school student in DC will not either know or will not believe that they're eligible to take on these type of positions, which is very sad because even though that some of these internships, paid internships, are highly competitive, that either we have failed at not preparing them to take on these positions, or have not prepared them to have the confidence to feel like they should try. And so there's great opportunity in this city. And I've always said, because of the Smithsonian museums in themselves, if you never spent a day in school, if you go to Smithsonian museums and educate yourself every day, you should have at least an 11th grade, 12th grade education.
Actually, I very much agree with that. I very much agree.
At least.
Because you can learn so much.
You can learn so much, and it's free, and so there's just so many fundamental disconnects in terms of knowledge, information, how we are engaging our kids in terms of being prepared to compete in the 21st century. And so, some of the examples that I've used, are real, very real programs that are partnered between our universities and the public sector. But then there's other opportunities that exist that we should be striving to prepare our kids for, that go above and beyond, or not only in public sector work or construction work, but in the areas of science and technology and engineering and math. And the opportunities are here.
Yeah.
So I want to be the conduit to get our kids engaged and get our underemployed adults working, and give them a sense of, not of entitlement, but a sense of belonging and of acceptance and inclusion in what's happening here in DC.
I think you brought up a point of preparing our kids. And while I do not have children, but I think we also have to change the mindset of parents and adults, or those that we consider family, because I don't know about you, but also my parents kind of had this idea of whatever degree I got, it had to have the name of the job and the title kind of thing. It's I majored in history with a global focus, and I have a concentration in Holocaust and genocide studies. So but what does that, what
does
job?
that translate
Yeah,
into?
what is what job are you specifically gonna get? And my master's in public policy, they're what are they need those concrete things, because this idea that Black people aren't going to get those jobs that you talk about wanting that go with those degrees, you're not going to get those jobs. And I think we have to change the narrative around that and change the mindset of parents and adults on that too, to be no, your kids can totally do that as long as they set their mind to it like anybody else, and let me show you how, because I've been there. It's not, I think if we change that mindset about ourselves and kind of just show up and take our seat at the table versus waiting for someone to give it to us, and we train ourselves and we train others how to do that, then the narrative will be, you can be a doctor if that's what you want to be. Because I didn't grow up like that. It wasn't this I have friends who aren't people of color who my parents told me I could be whatever I wanted, or they were very supportive. I was my parents told me to get a degree and get a job and make sure I had money in my savings account and never less than $100 in my bank. These very concrete
very concrete things,
which are all important.
Yes.
But why can't we tell our little Black girls, boys, and everything in between, and Hispanic and Asian, the same thing? You can make money from your dream. You can be comfortable with your dream. I think that is a powerful narrative.
I think that the older I get, the more I lean toward your parents' concern because it's one of making sure that you have something that you can fall back on, or
Yeah.
at least to be in a mindset of saying, what is going to be my fallback plan with a liberal arts degree and a graduate degree in policy. And I think that this requires, much broader and longer thought in terms of one's mindset, is that if this is what I really love, and if my mindset is really about following my passion and my dream, then if one is not made available to me, then I must create the opportunity for myself. And so one thing I've always loved about Jamaicans and West Indians and West Africans who come here is that they always create opportunities for themselves. Always.
That's very true.
Always.
Yes.
No matter if they have a degree, no degree, high school diploma, no diploma, they always create opportunities for themselves that puts food on the table and a roof over their head and a sense of family, in that everything is going to be all right. I've seen it over and over and over again without any excuse, and there are opportunities everywhere in this country, and that's why there's a study done, and I can't remember what the source. I want to say it was Black Enterprise. I pulled this article up about a month ago, and it's the second article I read on this subject in about 30 years. The first one that I remember reading was back in 1987. But they were doing a comparative analysis of blacks of the diaspora and from Africa, and what the median household income was. And above and beyond, Jamaicans came first.
That does not surprise me
Yeah,
at all.
Jamaicans came first, and then Nigerians, and then
Sounds about right.
I can't remember which other island it was. I want to say Barbados, and then the Antilles, Lesser Antilles, but Trinidad and Tobago. But the point is that I always saw these type of comparative studies as almost like a double blind. So unless you told me you were Jamaican, I wouldn't know that you're Jamaican. There's no way I could tell. And the only way is maybe over time, maybe some of your attitudes or ways or behaviors may nuance you outside of the African American way of thinking and behaving. But aside from that, if I were white, I say, you look just like so-and-so down the street to me. So what I'm trying to say to you is that if the response to stimuli is the same, even though you and I are from two different places, or our parents are from two different places, how come is it that the chances are, based upon historical evidence and data, that you're going to do better economically and financially than I will? Why? Because it has a lot to do with attitude and behavior, and the ability to not allow failure to be part of your lexicon.
Yeah, failure is not
It
an
is
option in the Abraham's household. Like,
No,
it's just not.
It's not an option. Excuses are not an option. And so what I'm trying to say to you is that you can get around the psychological racism and the marginalization that you will experience as much as I do. But you, instead of me looking at it as a Black American as a reason to quit, you see it as an opportunity to find another way. And that's and so anyway, I'm getting off the subject, but
No, that's perfectly on subject.
I wanted to raise that issue because I think that a lot of us Black Americans have a lot to learn, and I realized it a long time ago when I first traveled. When I was 14 years old, I was in a work camp program in St. Lucia. And that was the first time I was outside the country, and I realized that there are opportunities for Black people in international work that I would have never known had I not traveled outside the country. And then when I traveled to Jamaica and lived there, and I lived in Southern Africa, and really had a chance to contrast and compare how whites treat us over in South Africa back in the late 80s but how Africans felt a spiritual sense of freedom once they were in Swaziland and outside that awful country at the time. I said, I have fell outside of my reality.
Mm-hmm.
I am no longer being judged by white people. And my objective reality as an African is a lot more than I'm giving myself credit for. And so when I came back to the States 6 years later, after living in two countries,
Mm-hmm.
I had a whole renewed sense of self in that, not to sound offensive, but that, the whole white world that we're living in was nothing but an illusion as far as what they had set against us and caricaturing us and classifying us as less than human beings and less than literate. And so once I began to realize that and to act upon it, I had good experiences and bad experiences in work and everything like that when I refused to stand up to whites who belittle me or what have you, or belittle others. And I've learned lessons from that, but I also believe in God. And so every closed door opened up another. And it's happened consistently to me all the time.
I think you brought up many good points. And I think living in other countries and seeing the way in which they had opportunities versus, I think, Black Americans have opportunities, because it's funny because obviously I grew up in a Jamaican household, but our closest family friends are Nigerians.
Okay.
So the two most intense
I'm not surprised to hear that.
Yeah, we are very, very similar. I know that, and just in.
Oh, you're more similar than you think you are.
Oh yeah, like no, but I grew up.
Genetically, you're similar too.
I literally think about the fact that because we were so close, it's like I grew up in like a half Nigerian family and a half Jamaican family because we just spent so much time with them, but it was like the same at the same time. And I think there's this like international kind of view. I think it's changing now because of, internet, and we can have more access to things about what or who Black people were or are in America because of how we were characterized on television.
Yeah.
And so when
caricature too.
It was a caricature. It wasn't what was real. And so coming here, there was a sense of like resilience. Like, we will not be like those people that we saw. And I think if you come from an immigrant family, they kind of instill that in you. It's like, you will not be running the streets. This will not be a Gangs of New York situation. This will not be. There's no such thing as failure. And I think Black Americans are extremely resilient because they're still here. Yeah. If that makes sense. Like, we are, like, because I am part of that, we're still here. But I think we can also learn from the immigrant people, Black people that come here, that, like, we have set our minds to something, so we are going to create out of that. No matter, like, we're not going to take no for an answer. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that now. But I can think of even when I was younger, not seeing that, at all, and kind of being an anomaly in that situation. And I think maybe changing that narrative, that it is not just for a certain group of people, but it's for all of us. Because no one's going to be able to tell that I am Jamaican if I walk down the street. They're going to be like, you look just as Black as, Bobby Joe sitting next to you. Yeah. So all those opportunities should be for all of us. And I think any other marginalized group, not just Black people, and specifically focusing on women, and even, white women, because they are also a marginalized group. I want us to come together and take back what we rightfully deserve. Not more, not like...
As women or as women of color?
Both.
Oh, okay.
I think we, in a world where we make up half the population, quite literally, we should be given half of everything. And I feel like for so long, and I think as you divide that up amongst people of color, like that, your share gets smaller and smaller versus what it should be.
Yeah, there is a worldview that I've learned. I'm a docent at the African Art Museum, and last year I went through a 3-month training 2 times a week on the aesthetics of African art, from 1400 BC, 5000 BC, all the way up to contemporary, representing about 35, 40 countries. And I had to get beyond the aesthetics of the themes and the nature and the mediums that were used, and get more into the spirituality of it, as it relates to our commonality. And I'm not talking about commonality as African people, but our commonality in terms of our connectiveness to each other in this discussion as man and woman. And something I learned, that before the transatlantic slave trade and colonialization, the stature of man and woman in hierarchy, not only in the household, but also in rulership, was always complementary. And history will tell you that in virtually every African civilization before the transatlantic slave trade, there was always a woman who was given equal status to a man in roles of social hierarchy and governorship. Now, on a deeper level, a lot of the artifacts that I had to interpret, and I do interpret for folks who visit, give women the role of goddess, and not in terms of like an Amazon, Wonder Woman type of goddess, but the type of goddess who is able to create life, make life, and who is the cradle of society, starting from the most basic family unit. And somewhere over time, which I believe has a lot to do with our involvement in the slave trade and our subsequent roles as slaves, the whole role of the woman was diminished, especially the African woman. And many black men, after slavery, put down women and took on European ways and behaviors, and diminished the role of the woman to the most docile role and subservient role, just as the European had, in order to create dominance in the family. And there's a lot of psychological reasons and justifications and misalignments behind that I won't go into, but I think that because this is a capitalist country, and that black women are performing, accelerating in terms of graduation rates, in terms of getting into white-collar jobs and taking over positions of authority, now is the time for us to, I think, as black men, to definitely revisit this and to reappreciate the role of a woman, not only in the corporate workplace, but as the family member who is the cradle of our family unit and should be respected as such.
I completely agree. I think that we should be appreciated more for what we offer and who we are. And
which is a lot.
Which is
so much. Yes.
We are so much. And I think it's interesting because you would hear like this idea of like a crazy black woman or like a loud black woman, and it's always put in those terms because we're literally just sticking up for ourselves and saying our rights.
Yeah.
And saying nothing crazy, nothing loud, but something that's just real.
I was about to say something that's more or less true.
Yeah, it's never.
If a black woman checks me for something that I did or did not do, I have to take a look in the mirror. I want to fight back, and I want to say you crazy, and I don't need to deal with this, but ultimately I have to. Because that's me.
Yeah. No, I think it's true.
And no black woman is not going to take her interests above yours if they truly love you. And they're not going to criticize you unless they truly love you. And so, that's something that, we need to be reminded of every day.
You're such an anchor. Like, I just see my mom, who like my dad fully supports her. It's just like, as a black woman, how strong she truly is. And I'm just blessed in the fact that like I have a dad who recognizes that.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Because that's so often black women are the anchor of so many things. And truly, you know?
And not given credit for it. Or are being blamed for it, you know?
And we stand, I think,
for other people's problems.
Yes, and we're always, I forgot who I was listening to, but it's like, it's always a black woman's job to cradle somebody, make somebody feel better,
yes.
constantly lifting you up, but who is lifting us up? And I think it is so important that we recognize the role that we play, because I think one day, because I'm tired, like, you know what I mean? I think, like, the day that black women, we collectively go, I'm just tired, I'm going to take a nap, I literally think the world will crumble. Like, I think that people just won't know what to do. They won't know how to handle it because
yes.
we are such pillars. And,
you are such pillars.
And we should be held to that esteem.
And not only should you be held in high esteem, but, you know, we should learn how to love our black women more and to appreciate you for everything that you do and for everything that you're trying to help us see on every single day. And because you are the atlas of the world, you are the cradle of civilization, and you know, I had several epiphanies over the last year about why this is so true, and historically, it's evidenced so much.
No, it's true. We're great.
Yes.
But you know, in a way that is so beautiful, and not to be, you know, big on ourselves or brag. It's just the way that we are. And I think women, but black women especially, but just like women in general, are taken so much for granted for the role that we literally give life.
Yes, you do give life
to the entire population.
That's right.
Regardless of gender, sex, anything. Like, we literally give life.
Yes, that's
and I
right.
think that the thing that we do that freely and without hesitation and happily do so, that in itself should be honored. And it's so interesting that we live in a space where that is being taken for granted. And I want to see that change. And I think that starts with, you know, you being a community leader and working in your community. And if you're training up young men or people who identify as men to live in that light, I think is so beautiful, because then they'll know that when they train up their daughters and their sons or whoever, like, it will create a generation of people that want to do that and want to honor who we are as humans, as women, as people of color, like, all of that enclosed in one.
Well, I hope so. I mean, the only regret that I have, I mean, I've been helping my son, my nephews, you know, men who are in my family. You know, it's been a priority. It hasn't always been a top priority, but it's been a priority. And you know, I've learned, you know, that my nephews, or the men who are part of my family who did not have a positive father or male influence, usually the ones who grew up not respecting authority. And that not only applied to not respecting women, but not respecting other men, peers their age, not respecting their supervisors, not respecting, you know, whatever situation they found themselves in. And I found there's a high correlation. I think that, you know, the deficit is because, you know, they did not learn how to respect a male figure while they're growing up. They felt like they didn't have any entitlement to when they're older. So, you know, that may be a controversial statement, but I found that, at least, you know, part of my experience with the young men, you know, who I was a father figure or a father to. And so, you know, it's I think it's critical. You know, the system has been, for the last 40 years, since the end of the Vietnam War, you know, it's taken very, very systematic steps to destabilize the African American family, either through drugs, through jail, through barriers to education, barriers to jobs, barriers to positive identity. Every single year, there's always been an anti-symbol or someone who's been caricatured from our race as a black male, stripped of his identity, and for him doing something to somebody else, or for him showing a character deficit. And so these images, they come into our mind, they permeate, and we may not act that way, but we internalize it in the way that this is accepting that this is the acceptable way to act, whether it's sag jeans, or whether it's vernacular, or whether it's making fun of somebody for the way that they speak, or because they decide they want to go to college, or because they don't want to go into football, they want to go into IT or become public policy wonk. It's just something that's we have to learn how to turn off the television and to read, and to just simply, like you and I every day are doing, just sitting down and talking about life, and learning how to void ourselves of the distractions that have been created to confuse us. Now's the time. We live in a world paradox where we have all the information in the world, but yet we choose to have these images control our minds, instead of us choosing how we filter to control it, and to how to better ourselves.
So I want to end on that note. Thank you so much, Joe, for taking the time to talk to me. Thank you for being a member of this community and being integral in it. And
thank you for interviewing me.
Oh, of course. This is truly my favorite thing to do, so it's all good for me. But yes, thank you so much. Everybody go out and vote. If you can vote in Ward 5, if you're not registered to vote, you need to vote.
November
DC.
6th.
November 6th. I'm going to say November 6th. November 6th. I think you should vote. Vote Joe Green. You're going to have to write him in because you're a write-in candidate.
Yes, and my write-in candidacy name is Joseph Green III.
So everybody register to vote. You can vote in Ward 5. Also just register to vote because you should if you can. So write in Joseph Green III. All right, everybody, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us today. And you'll have me soon.